it's hard to answer the question, is SEO dead per se? But it's pretty easy to answer the question: is search and is SEO functionally where we need it to be today to serve our needs in the best possible way?
I'm thrilled today to have Toby Daniels on our podcast. Toby joins us as co-founder at On Discourse. I've been a personal friend of Toby for quite some time, going back almost a decade when we shared office space with him at his previous startup, which is a social media conference. Toby, welcome to the show. I'm tremendously excited about our conversation here today.
Thanks, Jason.
Great. You want to maybe just talk a little bit about your background before we dive into today's topic?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a builder, operator, entrepreneur. I've spent much of my career, the last 25 years or so, operating at the intersections of like media, technology, entertainment, marketing. Started my out in the early 2000s building websites, mid 2000s transitioned into kind of building social networking technologies, transitioned into the world of events and media and publishing through Social Media Week. And fast forward 12 years operating that company, exited to Adweek in 2020, transitioned out of there after being their chief innovation officer for a year to then start the next venture, which is On Discourse. And I think the through line, Jason, honestly, when I look back, and it's always easier to kind of create the narrative when you're looking back as opposed to when you're looking forward. But I think the through line, I think I've been fairly consistent about this. I've always just been very deeply interested in the role of technology, particularly in terms of like how it enables us to connect and communicate in profoundly interesting and important ways. And, On Discourse feels to me today to be very much the kind of like the manifestation of like many, many, many years, many decades of thinking long and hard about the ways in which we connect and communicate, the role of technology and how it can kind of shape and influence and in some cases like improve, in some cases worsen the ways that we connect. And so On Discourse, just real quick, it's a very early stage company. I have four co-founders, but also 35 co-founding members. We describe ourselves as a membership first media company that sort of sits at the intersection of business and tech. We really sort of are focused on how can we help our members unlock new ways of thinking in regards to the application of technology to business, which we execute through content, through media, but then also through live experiences too.
Great. And I think jumping into today's episode, I think really few people understand the evolving world of media better than Toby. And today we're going to be talking about media, some disruptive trends, Google, and how generative AI is changing everything. The mission On Discourse and really the through line rather in Toby's career has been connecting with customers. And the elephant in the room around the internet, around every conversation that you could possibly have around connecting customers, ultimately today is Google. Google, I remember when I was in grad school, came into play as this new quirky interface that took a lot of the complexity that Yahoo had developed trying to catalog the entire internet and just put a search box in front of it. And what do you know? You type in a few words and bada bing, it's a lot easier to use than what came before it. And here we are almost 2 decades later, in ChatGPT and OpenAI, again, ironically, came to market with a text box, one that is, significantly larger text box. And I think a lot of folks, and I'm sure a lot of listeners today, have typed in a few words, a few sentences, even a paragraph or more, and been generally impressed by what's been spit back. So today we're going to be focusing on this topic specifically around Google's role around media, Google's role in driving distribution for the businesses and many of our listeners here today. I'm really asking the question, what's the future of SEO? What role is generative AI and ChatGPT playing in the disruption? And is SEO dead, or will it be dead in the months or years as we know it? And how should we start preparing and thinking about this phase shift?
I've had so many conversations on this particular topic in the last few weeks. In fact, we even hosted an event which you were able to attend, Jason, that looked very specifically at the role, whether AI was going to kind of either destroy or serve as an enhancement to kind of media and the media models, in general. And I think this particular question around the future of SEO came up a lot. particularly because we can, it's very visceral right now, the shift that's happening. We talk about like shifts and transformations and all these sorts of things, but sometimes we don't like actually experience them viscerally and in the moment. But this feels like quite seismic in terms of change. And I think we have to like admit to ourselves that like Google and that search experience was really shitty. Like it offers an incredibly shitty experience, but like it's been really hard for us to admit that when there's been absolutely nothing that could serve as an alternative to the things that we need to do via the Google search engine. And now with ChatGPT and other sort of similar products, there is kind of an alternative. I mean, I've actually had people who are like deep in the weeds of this stuff, actually folks over at Google who would argue that actually, even Bard is not a particularly good alternative to using like the Google search engine. But the truth of the matter, it just depends. It depends on what you're trying to get done. What's very interesting for me is all of a sudden, the shittiness of that user experience has been sharply brought into focus. There's an alternative that serves you in a different way and provides you with a different way of approaching how we ask for things and how we pull information and insight to us. And in some cases, it's far superior in terms of providing a better, more effective, cleaner experience. And so we're at the beginning, of course, and this isn't really an apples to apples, but there's something in this that clearly represents a massive and potentially hugely disruptive amount of change that is coming in the future. And I think that it's hard to answer the question, is SEO dead per se? But it's pretty easy to answer the question, is search and is SEO functionally where we need it to be today to serve our needs in the best possible way?
Let's take a ride backwards in time for a few minutes and just talk about how SEO evolved as we know it today, and really how SEO works more broadly. And I'm sure many of our listeners, looking at their Google Analytics reports, will see that 5%, 10%, or well into the double digits for many brands, of traffic is coming actually from Google keywords, and not just paid, but certainly organic. And the beauty of SEO is for anyone with a direct-to-consumer brand, or really anyone on the internet for that matter, if you see an opportunity around a gap in what people are looking for, you can either bid on that keyword or create content or bring a new product to market. That when someone searches for whatever, a new type of truck or a new type of clothing, or has some sort of problem, your webpage can hit number one, and you can satiate that gap in the market and that point of consumer demand. And Google has just made a killing around this ecosystem. They built tooling around keyword insights, both within AdWords and dedicated tools for organic search. So anyone can understand what customers are looking for. They provide visibility around the effectiveness of keywords, both paid and organic as well. And again, the ecosystem, I guess the basic UI around Google, is one where authorship, ownership of media, ownership of websites, ownership of the product SKU pages or the vacation destinations or whatever it may be, that you have to offer on the open web, is incredibly clear. Even details in the UI, like verifying, who is the publisher or who is the retailer. Google plays a hand in deep business identity. Is this a reputable website? Or is this some fly-by-night place? And even things like if you're not using HTTPS, if you're not using SSL, if you're not using modern security, Google, in the last 5 years has cleaned a lot of that up as well. So for Google, it's not just a matter of content, but it's a deep notion of identity, of brand identity, of personal identity, and it's really just this. They've shaped the web materially in a world where Google may not have existed. And as a result, this is really where SEO comes. And Toby, I don't know if you want to talk about this SEO, old school SEO, and what things looked like 5-10 years ago. And it's sort of your perspective on the other side of that. On your side.
Well, actually, almost have a question I'll put back to you in the way that you just described, sort of almost the historical path that has led us to where we are today. The question is, great. I think Google, obviously is the best in the world at everything you just described, and how they have shaped the way that we think about the internet, how we think about the organization of information from the individual brand standpoint or the destination standpoint, how we then architect and design and optimize, our presence according to those rules. But the question is, have those rules served us, or are they serving us today in the way that you think they should? Or are we just operating and existing within a system that is either broken or ultimately not optimized to serve me, my business, or my specific goals in terms of what I'm trying to accomplish, particularly if you think about this in the context of marketing?
I mean, look, it all comes down to the consumer, bringing it home to marketing. No one thought about how cool an electric car could be until, Tesla came with their 15-inch screens and, all sorts of, fancy electronic gadgets that people wouldn't imagine would be inside of a car. And guess what? A year ago, people were using Google, and they were generally happy. Yes, you go on Twitter and the geeks would complain about quality and so on and so forth. But your average consumer, guess what? Searches are up every year. People are generally find what they're looking for and they're generally happy. The beauty with disruption and the beauty with technology is things come to market that consumers weren't expecting, and then consumers have an aha moment, and then consumer trends change. So when I sort of hear your question, I think, look, as being the geek in the room, who, for the last several years has felt that Google could have been doing a lot better. Yes, I would have argued that, at sort of an existential or philosophical level, rather, the ecosystem could have been a lot better. That being said, in the absence of ChatGPT, the ecosystem works, and Google has not created a level playing field, but they have created a playing field. They've created one where brands can compete with each other, but Google has the upper hand. Google sets the rules. Google one day, 3 years ago, decided to deprecate third-party cookies. They realized that they were actually going to crater the entire ecosystem. They had to roll the whole thing back. But it's that kind of power, I think anyone on the other side, has lived through and realizes how unequal things are. And I say it this way because when you look at where ChatGPT is today, it's both been incredibly disruptive and also incredibly terrifying around how immature it is. For listeners, for listeners who don't know how ChatGPT works, it's trained on the same data as Google. The same set of web pages, the same set of news articles. It has all the same inputs. But when I ask, ChatGPT, how do I make a ham sandwich? They don't give me 10 places with 10 reputable recipe sites to make a ham sandwich. They just tell me how to make a ham sandwich. And as a consumer, I don't care where the recipe came from. But as a brand, if I run I run all recipes or any one of the other relatively large recipe sites, this is very threatening. Because everything I just went through around the ecosystem that Google has built, is completely obfuscated, anonymized. There's no notion of identity on the other side of the machine. The machine just takes all the content, forgets about who built it, who created it, who popularized it, or any of the things that are first-class citizens for Google, and then blends it into their 1.76 trillion node, I think is the latest deep learning net. With GPT-4, to give the consumer the answer, which quite frankly is all they care about, but at the same time, get to the heart of today's conversation in that there's real disintermediation here, in the distribution channel known as SEO, there's so many brands that existed on, just is not going to exist in the current implementation of ChatGPT as it is today.
And do you think, because we sort of touched on this before, but like oftentimes when we are experiencing change that kind of very visceral, feels very real time, there seems to be something new emerging every single day, and the pace feels sometimes like a little bit overwhelming, but at the same time it will take time for the type of change we're talking about right now for there to be a new landscape that ultimately is either an improvement upon or replacement to SEO as we know it today. It will take time. Do you have a sense of like actually how long it will take? I mean, you referenced the kind of like Google walking back the whole cookies thing. I mean, that's just been years of just sort of conversation and sort of anticipation in terms of what that ultimately was going to represent, and it still hasn't happened. So just to sort of try and ground this a little bit, like how long do you think it's going to take?
I think it could potentially move very quickly. Google is playing defense. Google owns the market. Google sets the rules. Google is motivated by fear. ChatGPT, OpenAI, and the entire set of competitors behind them, they see wide open opportunities. They're not afraid of making mistakes. They're not afraid of big swings. They're not afraid of moving too fast. That being said, I think there are some fundamental changes that need to happen, for the model to actually work. But I think things can move at a faster pace than I think folks might be ready for it to be moving.
It's super interesting, and I think protectionism, particularly if you're Google and you've essentially operated in a sort of monopolistic way over all of these years. It's like, yeah, you want to hold on to that, and it's like that. I mean, do you really believe that they are investing in the idea of what it means to disrupt their own business? Because that's sort of clearly kind of, this is what it feels like. I mean, do you imagine a world where we're looking at like their quarterly earnings in a couple of years' time, and we've seen the search business significantly shrink?
I think, look, I spent some time at Google many, many years ago, and Google is obviously a highly data-driven business. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of how they're responding over there today, but I can tell you with a very educated guess that they have a very, very deep understanding of the types of queries that people submit. And I think something that I don't have visibility into, but it's a good question to ask is, if you're on Google and you're searching for flights, flight from New York City to Vegas, Google has Google Flights, and in 2 clicks you can spend $800 on a round trip flight, and then Google probably makes some healthy chunk of commission off of that. Are people asking those kinds of queries in ChatGPT? I mean, they're certainly not giving good answers today. So the answer is, once you do it once, you're probably not going to do it again. But Google's probably thinking very deeply about that and the broader set of queries that they can service with structured results that have better commercial implications. And I think they probably see where ChatGPT is eating into their queries as those that are less commercially, today less commercially focused, but will change consumer behaviors. So I think the question to ask is, look, in Bard, Google can build good technology, but will they make those big swings? And even because legally and copyright issue, the reason why Google had to buy YouTube, they had an identical product, in Google Videos. I guess it was 2006, 2005. And the only reason why they lost to YouTube was that is that in YouTube, if you uploaded your video, it would be ready in 4 seconds. Because guess what? YouTube didn't care about reviewing the content, about copyright issues or not. They were YouTube. They were the fast growing, hot, sexy video startup. But Google's lawyers wouldn't let them do that. So you put your video up, you'd have to wait an hour, 30 minutes at the very least, if not longer. And it just was not a satisfying content production experience. And because of that, YouTube's growth went at a much, much faster rate than Google Video. And ultimately, Google had to purchase them before it got away from them. But now we're at a place where both how OpenAI is structured, and the scale of this business, it seems pretty much impossible at this point for Google to make an acquisition of their business. So it is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, I've spent a fairly decent amount of time both playing with and getting a deeper understanding of how Bard works and where that can fit into the kind of like broader ecosystem. But I've also spent time speaking to people, over at Google and Bard, and to kind of get an understanding of kind of where their head's at. And it's interesting because the general sentiment is very different to the way they're being covered in the media. And I think a lot of what you said is right about the anatomy of Google and what makes them different. And they're obviously big, but they can build great products. But what I hear mostly and fairly consistently is that we have a long way to go before this gets good. They are so, and this is an important actually point for people to recognize, because sometimes it's hard to kind of read between the lines, that they are very deliberately calling Bard an experiment. Everywhere you look on the site, it's languaged in a very particular way. They've never done that. There was no such thing as launching a product and calling it an experiment, like branding it as an experiment. Sure, there was like the beta version of something, and that was kind of like, I guess, geek code for the same thing. But they're like leading with that messaging for a very particular reason, and that's because it's just like not a particularly great product. You know what I mean? And it has a long way to go, but they have to. I mean, it comes to this other point about building in the open. Which is just a concept that I find just super fascinating, and like Sam Altman and OpenAPI are so bullish on building in the open, and I think Google is skittish on building in the open. They don't feel comfortable at all. And I'm interested, do you have any kind of sort of thoughts on that? Because does one win over the other because of one's bullishness and willingness to kind of be out there in the open, experimenting? Taking these big swings and probably making big and sometimes costly mistakes versus, trying to be a little bit more closed door about it.
I mean, look, I don't agree with much of what Mark Zuckerberg says, but he does have a design philosophy that has always stuck with me, and that's his moniker of "build fast and break things." But translate that into a more reasonable perspective. Success and innovation comes with pushing yourself and making sure that you can learn from failure. When you have a large business like Google, even if the technology was great, calling an experiment internally and externally sets a precedent around it. And I'll tell you, when Google implements BART into Google mainline search, there's a knob, your basic precision recall knob, that can either turn it up so it hits 8%, 12%, 15%, 25%, 50% of queries, or turn it down so it hits 8%, 6%, or 2% of queries. And when you look at the powers that be, clearly that kind of branding is a top-down initiative, and the aggressiveness of the knob is going to be closer to 0 than to 100. And that issue alone is really limiting for their ability to learn. Every time a query is answered, either well or not, is an opportunity to get feedback, qualitative and quantitatively, around whether it's success or not. And if you don't jump in with both feet first, it's just harder to really understand what's going on.
Yeah,
and it works.
Totally.
So Toby, we're sort of getting to the bottom of the episode here. One question for you, and then I'll recap and give folks an opportunity to find you and learn more about On Discourse. But if you were to have this conversation again with anyone in the world, who would it be and why?
Well, my answer kind of goes back to why I'm sort of drawn to this space, this industry, why I've been beyond just professionally engaged for 25 years, but very philosophically engaged, and I enjoy reading around a lot of these things versus just being kind of in the weeds of what it kind of means for media or marketing. And so Yuval Harari is one of my favorite writers. I think Sapiens is just an extraordinary book, a brief history of humankind. And so I think I would like to have this conversation with Yuval and dig into kind of, some of the more philosophical and ethical kind of like aspects of like how we should be thinking about the future. I also have been spending a lot of time with Sam Harris and his podcast recently, and he's been popping up on some other people's podcasts as well. And I think he's someone who has just such an interesting and very much an alternative take on some of the AI related things that we're talking about, and particularly kind of as we should be again thinking about our investment in the future. So either Sam or Yuval will be pretty good. But honestly, Jason, you've been great.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Toby. I really just recapping at least some of my takeaways from day to today. When you ask about the future of SEO, I think the question to ask is what is Google? And it's really two things at a high level. Number one is a source of knowledge. You can ask Google, how do I make a ham sandwich? You can ask Google, where do I buy a pair of pliers? But it's also distribution. It's a lifeline for so many brands, from retail to media, travel, to experiences, to everything, to connect with consumers, through this incredibly powerful algorithm that, has been as popularized its name as being synonymous with search. But as we look forward, I think, we see something that on the knowledge side in ChatGPT is incredibly disruptive. But all the questions around distribution are completely wide open. And I do think things are going to move quicker. And I do think, ChatGPT and or whoever comes alongside of them, will be thinking very, very deeply about these. But certainly the world, 1, 2, 3, and certainly 3 to 5 years from now is going to look incredibly different than it is today. So Toby, before we close out, maybe a quick plug on Discourse and anyone who wants to learn more about what you all are doing.
Yeah, I mean, if you enjoy engaging in, a conversation around these different topics, but in particular, if you are really seeking to unlock a sort of new perspectives, new ways of thinking, and you're excited to be able to achieve that through provocation and through discourse, then definitely check us out. Come to ondiscourse.com. We are a media platform. We are membership based. There is a way of accessing our content through a multiple tiers of membership, and we also have a tier of membership for people who are interested in coming together in the real world at our events and connecting through many of the closed door, off the record conversations that we facilitate on behalf of our members, which is really where you find a much more profound level of understanding, particularly around these sorts of topics. So yeah, check it out on discourse.com.
And as a member and as someone who's attended several of On Discourse's events, the level of thought is fantastic, and the diversity and thought leadership across attendees and members is excellent as well. So I'd encourage everyone to check out On Discourse. And with this, thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.com.